The most dangerous thing in this society is not the lies whispered in the dark, but the lies openly repeated every day, right before our eyes. There are truths that never truly disappear. They only change form, cloaking themselves in layers of words to become more acceptable so that people no longer recognize their brutal essence. That is one of the oldest yet most sophisticated techniques of power, turning language into a tool to conceal rather than to enlighten. Language was born to convey, to open a path for truth to emerge. But in the hands of those who wield power, it becomes a curtain, a mask, that blurs the line between the real and the fake. Instead of saying torture, they call it enhanced interrogation techniques. Instead of admitting innocent civilians died under bombs, they say collateral damage. Instead of bluntly acknowledging printing money to bail out bankrupt banks, they dress it up as quantitative easing. And with just a small change in wording, people's perception shifts. What was once a crime becomes a technical measure. What was once injustice turns into an economic strategy. People often think lies require secrecy, require conspiracies in the shadows. But in reality, the most dangerous lies appear openly, brightly, on primetime television, in solemn press releases, or in carefully crafted speeches. It is there that power doesn't need to hide. It only needs to rename things to make them acceptable. In history, humanity has witnessed this method many times. When soldiers in World War I fell into panic under shell fire, it was called shell shock. Two short words, evoking dizziness and horror, directly reflecting the brutality of war. But gradually, that blunt language was replaced by battle fatigue, which then evolved into post-traumatic stress disorder. The same pain, the same trembling body, the same broken spirit. But when the name changes, society sees it differently, less urgent, less severe, less piercing to the heart. In philosophy, we might say, the essence of things remains, but language creates a new phenomenon, distancing us from that essence. Heidegger once emphasized that language is the house of being, the place where existence is revealed. But if that house is seized, if it is distorted, then being itself is misunderstood, obscured. And that is what power understands very well. To control language is to control the way people understand the world. George Carlin, a comedian but also a street philosopher, pointed this out decades ago. He once sneered, "It's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it." That line may sound like satire, but it reflects a deep truth. The system doesn't need whips to maintain power. It only needs to plant dreams, pleasant words, so that you submit voluntarily. In fact, modern power is no longer as brutal as in the past, when kings ordered executions for dissent. It has become soft, invisible, like threads wrapping around our thoughts and feelings. A policy, if called temporary, is resisted, but if called permanent, people themselves will defend it because humans tend to accept what cannot be changed. Philosophy calls this the justification of the system, the psychological need to believe that what exists must be rational and necessary. And it is precisely this need that power exploits to consolidate its position. Take recent examples. The Iraq War was never directly called an invasion to change the regime. It was cloaked as Operation Iraqi Freedom, sounding like a noble liberation. During the pandemic, hundreds of billions of dollars flowing into the pockets of large corporations were called economic stimulus and job protection, while the meager aid for ordinary people was labeled dependency-inducing subsidies. The same mechanism of distributing money, but when it reaches the powerful, it becomes a development strategy, and when it reaches common citizens, it turns into a burden. This is not a random game. It is a calculated strategy, built on subtle understandings of psychology. When language is sanitized, truth becomes alien. When concepts are polished, crimes turn into policies. We think we are living in an age of transparency, but in fact we are surrounded by mirrors that bend the truth. Nietzsche once said, "Truth is just a forgotten army of metaphors." What we call truth in today's society is sometimes nothing more than a collection of words chosen, arranged, and repeated by power until people no longer remember their original essence. That repetition turns language into a ritual, and once it becomes a ritual, it is no longer questioned. Humans, in their struggle to survive, often accept these frameworks of language because they bring a sense of safety. Facing raw, brutal reality directly is too heavy a burden. Therefore, society needs those linguistic shells in order to keep functioning. But what is the price of such comfort? It is forgetfulness, the loss of the ability to see naked truth. When we let language be manipulated, we not only lose the ability to name things, we lose the ability to think clearly. And that is the greatest danger. Language not only defines the world, it shapes our consciousness of that world. If the words we use are distorted, then our very thoughts are distorted. And when thought is distorted, freedom is lost, even if on the surface we believe we are free. Carlin once pointed out that power does not want a population capable of critical thinking. Such a population would be dangerous, hard to control. They want a community that argues about trivial things like masks, toilets, gender, while missing the larger movements, the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, the restructuring of the economy for the benefit of the powerful. That is the great trick, distracting the crowd with small debates so that true power quietly operates behind the scenes. In political philosophy, this is called governance by dispersion, keeping the masses entangled in countless small conflicts so they never have the time to see the overarching structure of power. In practice, it is the art of control without violence, a gentle yet effective repression. If we want to escape that matrix, the first step is to learn to question language. Whenever a concept sounds too smooth, too pleasant, we must ask, what is it hiding? Who benefits from this naming? Does this language serve truth or some other interest? Otherwise, we will continue to live inside a dream woven by others, a dream that makes us bow down willingly and call it freedom. If in the first part we saw language as a curtain, then in this part, that curtain is not only spread by the rulers, it is also held by each individual among us, voluntarily drawn up to avoid facing the naked truth. This is what makes power so enduring. People are not only deceived, they also want to be deceived. The human brain is not designed to face unsettling truths continuously. When we encounter data that goes against our beliefs, the nervous system immediately triggers a defense mechanism. The brain regions responsible for fear and threat light up, while the rational regions fall silent. Instead of thinking more clearly, we become more confused. In that very moment, we are no longer rational beings as we imagine, but defensive creatures, choosing a sense of safety over truth. This is precisely why people so easily accept ready-made stories. An unjust policy, when painted with beautiful words, becomes easier to swallow. An environmental disaster, when described as a sustainable development challenge, becomes less frightening. And a social crisis, when called a period of adjustment, makes us feel less desperate. Instead of asking, why are things this way? We choose to believe that this is the natural order of society. There is a great paradox here. People not only accept a system that harms them, they are even willing to defend it. When a policy is announced as temporary, people are ready to protest. But when that same policy is called permanent, the crowd itself turns to protect it, as if protecting themselves. The belief that everything is already settled brings peace of mind, even if the price is prolonged injustice. We have seen this repeated throughout history. In Roman times, when the people were exploited, they were not told that the poor are being drained. Instead, they were given bread and circuses, a bit of food, a bit of entertainment, enough to make the masses forget the truth that their blood and sweat were feeding the empire. In modern society, the circus has changed. Endless arguments online, media storms about celebrities' private lives, unending culture wars. Meanwhile, the decisions that truly affect the lives of millions take place quietly behind closed doors. Here we see a familiar strategy, fragmenting human attention. When all mental energy is absorbed by loud but less important issues, we no longer have the strength to see the bigger shifts. That is political magic, making the audience's eyes focus on one hand, while the other hand acts freely. In the philosophy of language, this is the formation of the window of acceptance. Every debate seems heated, but all revolve around pre-designed options. It is like entering a restaurant with 50 different dishes, but all made from the same ingredient. People feel they are freely choosing, when in reality their choice has already been limited. Carlin called this the illusion of choice. He clearly saw that the system doesn't need to hide much. It only needs to set the framework of the game so that every protest, every debate, every disagreement remains inside that frame. And the subtlety is this: when we believe we are resisting, we are in fact still operating within the space the system built. Let us look back at the pandemic. Media overflowed with debates about masks, distancing, and personal freedom. People took to the streets, argued fiercely online, but very few asked, who benefited from the massive bailout packages? Why did billions of dollars fall into corporate hands while millions of small businesses disappeared? While the crowd fought over details, the bigger picture was obscured, and when the shouting subsided, a new order had formed, the rich richer, the poor poorer, with hardly anyone noticing. The strength of modern power does not lie in forcing you to believe. It lies in creating a linguistic reality in which you want to believe. You even persuade yourself that it is reasonable. This is a form of collective self-deception. Nietzsche once said that humans prefer to live in illusion because truth is too heavy. Camus emphasized that humans need myths to go on living, even when they know those myths are false. And from Freud to modern psychologists, all have pointed out that much of our mental activity serves to protect the ego from collapsing under reality. From this, power has learned how to exploit this weakness. It does not need to create complete lies, only to offer a more pleasant version of the truth. People will choose to believe it because that is how they survive. But this choice is not harmless. When we repeatedly accept polished language, our minds gradually lose the ability to name things directly. The soldier's pain is no longer shell shock, but post-traumatic stress disorder. The worker who loses his job is no longer a victim of policy, but redundant labor. The starving poor are no longer the abandoned, but those in need of social assistance. Each layer of language is a pane of frosted glass, and the more layers there are, the further we are from truth. So the most important question is, how do we escape this vicious circle? How do we recognize that the noisy daily arguments are just the surface, while the real flow of power runs hidden beneath? The answer, though difficult, still lies within each person's capacity. Learn to observe your own emotions when receiving information. If a piece of news makes you too excited, too angry, too comfortable, pause. Strong reactions are often signs that you are being led. Truth is usually more complex, less dramatic, harder to accept. At the same time, we need to learn to ask the forbidden questions. Why is labor organized this way and not another? Why is profit prioritized over public health? Who decides what is natural in this system? These questions often have no immediate answers, but asking them opens a crack in the linguistic curtain. Finally, look at the flow of economic interests. Words may deceive us, but money does not. Every policy, every event, no matter how many layers of language it wears, ultimately leaves traces in the flow of money. And when we follow that flow, we will see the picture that slogans and speeches never want us to see. Modern power, after all, does not need swords. It only needs control of language and psychology. Humans, in their fear and craving for safety, will weave the net that holds them in place. And then, the system need only watch, even smile, knowing that without force, the crowd still binds itself with invisible chains. If language is the veil that covers, and human psychology is the place where that veil clings, then the ultimate question is, how can we remove that covering to look straight at reality? Carlin once said, "They don't want a population capable of critical thinking. They want people just smart enough to run the machines, but not smart enough to question the system." That statement is not only sarcastic, but also a warning, because once we accept living in the shadow of words, we have already abandoned the most basic freedom, the right to truly understand the world we live in. The first thing to do is to recognize our emotions when we encounter information. This is the foundational principle. When a piece of news immediately makes us furious, or when a slogan makes us feel strangely reassured, that is a sign we are being led. The truth rarely comes in the form of an extreme emotion. It is often dry, complex, difficult to accept. Practicing observing our own inner reactions is the first step to breaking free from manipulation. Next, we need to learn how to ask the questions considered dangerous. In society, there are questions always pushed aside. Why must we accept that work should take up most of a human life? Why is economic growth always more important than mental health? Why do we treat bank debt as a national problem, but personal debt as just an individual responsibility? These questions are not meant for us to find immediate answers, but to break the linguistic loop that keeps us in the state of naturalizing injustice. Another tool is to follow the flow of economic interests. Words may obscure, but money always leaves traces. If a policy is promoted as improving people's lives, see who benefits the most. If a project is called protecting the environment, see which company's interests it serves. Money, like an underground current, exposes the true nature of stories that have been polished. Yet, even when we have realized these things, there is still one challenge: intellectual loneliness. Standing up against the shell of words is not pleasant. The crowd prefers to live in a dream, and the one who breaks the dream is often seen as a troublemaker. Nietzsche once said that those who hold the truth too early are often considered mad. Therefore, patience and courage are needed to hold on to light in the dark. To overcome this, we cannot go alone. Individual awareness must connect into collective awareness. Each person, when sharing their discoveries, when inspiring others with questions instead of imposing answers, is planting seeds. Slowly, those seeds can create a garden of awakening. That is why Carlin, though just a comedian, became a philosopher of the crowd. He didn't teach them what to think, he just made them laugh and then question themselves. We need to build small communities, places where questioning language is not seen as bothersome, where uncomfortable truth is welcomed as an essential part of life. In the media age, this is more important than ever. Every minute we spend arguing over pre-programmed issues is a minute we lose the chance to look at the true structure of power. Another strategy is to change the way we consume information. Instead of letting ourselves be swept along by the rush of hot news, we must cultivate the habit of slowing down. Philosophy always teaches us that truth does not lie in the immediate, but in contemplation. News is designed to provoke quick reactions, but knowledge requires time. Slowing down to read, to reflect, to ask, who benefits, is itself an act of resistance. Remember, power never needs to hide everything. It only needs to control your attention. When you look here, you won't see what is happening there. Therefore, true freedom does not begin with possessing absolute truth, but with knowing where to direct your attention. Whoever controls attention controls the world. We must also realize that there can never be a fully transparent society. Humans inherently need illusions to continue existing. The problem is not in completely removing every shell, but in choosing which illusions are worth living with and not letting them turn into chains. A little self-deception can be healthy, as long as it doesn't prevent us from recognizing obvious injustices. In this scenario, the solution is not to search for the ultimate truth, but to build resistance to manipulation. Like the immune system, what matters is not eliminating every bacterium, but having the ability to recognize and respond. When we know to doubt language that is too clean, to ask about economic interests, to realize when we are being led by extreme emotions, that is the moment we are resisting. Carlin, with humor and bitterness, showed us the game being played. He didn't demand we abandon this world, nor did he say we must become heroes fighting the system. He simply advised us to stay alert to see clearly, so at least we don't become pawns moved at others' will. What made Carlin dangerous to those in power was not anger, but clarity. He dared to look at the truth unadorned. He dared to endure the discomfort of calling things by their right names. And that, as he once said, anyone can do, if they are willing to sit with the truth instead of running from it. And that is also the final message. Freedom does not begin with action, but with awareness. When you recognize the language game, when you see the veil that covers, you have already stepped 1 foot out of the maze. You may still live in the same system, but you are no longer entirely controlled by it. You can choose where to direct your attention, choose what deserves your mental energy. And that choice alone is already a revolutionary act. This world will never lack those who want to use words to sugarcoat the truth. But once you learn to recognize, to question, and to share that awakening with others, power will no longer be absolute. There will always be a crack, and through that crack, light can enter. Finally, remember, You don't need to overthrow the whole system to have freedom. Just keeping clarity before language means you have begun to live a less manipulated life, and that clarity, spreading from one person to another, can become something that power can never extinguish. The world will always have layers of verbal masks to conceal the truth. But what about you? Have you ever realized a word that made the truth more pleasant, or even completely distorted? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Who knows, your perspective might awaken someone else. If you find this video useful, don't forget to hit follow so we can dig deeper together into philosophical stories about power, language, and truth. Every follow, every comment is not just support, but also a part of the journey to seek clarity in a world full of illusions.